I'm Julie Graham, so welcome to the Ned Late Late Show, partnered with Power of Women TV. Yeah. So tonight we have some incredible women. I mean, they're leaders in their field of work, and they're joining us tonight to talk about their achievements and their, you know, how life worked out and how they achieved what they achieved. I mean, they're all exceptionally amazing trailblazers in their own right. And they have inspired and motivated so many other women by their life stories. So we want to hear the trials and tribulations of what they encountered along the way to reach the top of their game. And a lot of these women are involved in what we would think of male-dominated industries. So I'm just down to hear their stories and how they overcame that and how they work within that. So could you welcome our panellists? I will introduce them. So first we have Becky Stanion. Becky was appointed Chief Marketing Officer for Frasers Group after a 2.5-year stint repositioning the Sports Direct brand as part of the group's elevation strategy. She was introduced to me as basically the governor of Sports Direct. So Becky is responsible for the award-winning Fast and Slow campaign to support runners in their training during Ramadan, the first ever sports bra studio in their flagships to the star-studded Sports Direct Christmas campaign with the likes of Jack Grealish, Mason Mount, Big Nasty, Emma Raducanu. And she's also responsible for the luxury retail outlet Flannels and as well as other retail brands in the group: Sports Direct, USC, Frasers, Game, Belong, Everlast and Slashinger. Anyway, welcome.
Thank you.
Next we have Poppy Cleo. Now, Poppy is 20 and 21's Rugby Players Association Player of the Year, England's Player of the Year and the Six Nations Player of the Tournament. She's a force to be reckoned with within rugby, believe me. Next, we have the amazing Gay Kellaway. Now, Gay was the first woman to ride in a Gold Cup at Ascot on Pretty Picture, and the first woman ever to ride a winner at Royal Ascot, when her horse, Sprouting Boy, it was a huge moment in racing history, and she's rode over 60 winners, no mean feat in a country where racing is 95% male-dominated. And next we have Jill Hardy, Global Talent Expert at the global ad agency WPP and the head of their Female Leaders Network, Stella. We also have Rosemary Turner. After a hugely successful career running some of London's most well-known clubs, we've probably all been to them, Rosemary made a career change in the latter part of her journey, becoming a fully trained and experienced psychotherapist, counsellor and clinical supervisor. Good evening. We also have Sane Seven, whose real name is, okay, I'm going to try and pronounce it. It's Vic Grigorjaveti.
Very close. Grigorjaveta, but it's beautiful
okay.
the way you said it.
Well, you know, at least I gave it a go. Now, Sane is a sought-after female portrait photographer who works internationally on commissions that range from fashion icons such as Jimmy Choo to prime ministers, including the likes of Julia Gillard. Her recent work saw her partnering with The Female Lead, photographing 67 women changing the world today, depicting the incredible strength, talent, ingenuity, resilience, and bravery that women possess. And last but certainly not least, we have Louise Fay. Now, after spending 10 years as a police officer, Louise was medically retired from the force in 2017 after being diagnosed with a degenerative condition that affects her spine, pelvis and legs. An entrepreneur in her own right, she now runs Chronic Warrior UK, and it travels across the country to join her adapting boxing lessons, which have been proven to provide users with huge boosts to their fitness, mental health, confidence and self-esteem. Welcome to all our amazing panelists. So I wanted to sort of kick off with asking you about your sort of early careers and sort of journey to the top of your fields. it's really interesting to me how, I mean, all women's stories are interesting, but when you actually reach the top of your profession, it's always such an amazing thing. I'd like to start with you, especially because it fascinates me. You're in a 95% male-dominated sport. I mean, how did you overcome that? How did you get into it in the first place?
Well, my dad was a trainer, and I was champion amateur at 17, 18. And he decided I wanted to turn professional. I said, no way, I can't ride against Lester Piggott. There was no women. I said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to go be a trainer in America, and I want to be a racehorse trainer, which I am now. But anyway, I turned professional, despite, and yeah, I turned professional, and I was the only woman riding, and I rode a Royal Ascot winner in 1987 at the light age of 24, and yeah, it was tough. It was tough. I had sexual harassment, and I was up against a lot in the 80s, as you know. It was a tough time for women, especially in sport. But, you know, I was determined and so focused on doing that, and I was highly successful. And when I retired, because of weight issues, I was riding at 49 kilos, and it was killing me, wasting so hard. So I decided I wanted to be a racehorse trainer, and it's my passion. I love horses, I love animals, and I've been a trainer for 32 years, very successfully as well.
Oh, nice. I know. Becky, we were just chatting before the panel, and you were telling me how you, you know, got into your profession at the moment through just sheer luck, not kind of knowing what you wanted to do. I mean, how did you arrive at that journey?
I think when I grew up, there was real poverty of aspiration in terms of what you could be, as well as education. You know, I was always sort of told you could be a hairdresser or a secretary, and not that there's anything wrong with either of those professions, but literally that was all that was expected of me. And I didn't realise that I could work in sport if I wasn't a professional footballer or netball player. I didn't realise that I could work in luxury fashion if I wasn't going to be a fashion designer. And I actually ended up working in investment banking, weirdly, as a secretary, and then sort of realised I was quite good with numbers, and was fast-tracked to sort of become a trader, until one point somebody said to me, what on earth are you doing here? Like, you're like, this doesn't feel right for you. And I was like, okay. And they were like, have you considered going to university? And I was the first person in my family to go to university and put myself through university. And from that, just, you know, realised that there was this huge world that was actually there for me to take. And my parents have always instilled in me, you know, you can be anything you want to be. And I hope I instill that in my kids. But, you know, it really is about just educating kids that they can be things that they don't necessarily always see, that it is there for them, that they just kind of have to find their own path. And so, yeah, and I ended up just kind of really loving, I really love learning about people. And I think marketing and branding is really big on that, in terms of you have to understand who you're trying to talk to and who you're trying to communicate to. And then there's like all the fun stuff that goes with it. So yeah, I kind of ended up doing that, and I worked my way up, and just, you know, a lot of graft, really. I'm trying to prove people wrong, because they just thought I was this, you know, young girl from Essex who didn't really know what they were talking about, and that spurred me on. It's
great when they underestimate you. And what about you? Did you come through the same route, or did you? I mean, because you're now the head of this sort of huge global brands.
Yeah, so I started also my career as a secretary. I had an inkling that I wanted to work in public relations, but I didn't really know much about it. But I started, and I remember saying to my mother that I couldn't believe they paid me to do this job, because I loved it so much. And it was, you know, quite an interesting time for me, because there were many brilliant women working in very senior roles in PR at that time in the 90s. And they were very generous with their support. So I got a lot of sponsorship, a lot of support, and that's been really important to me, to kind of pay that back. So that's been a feature of my career. Anyway, I had a terrific career in PR. I enjoyed it a lot, but like a lot of people, I wanted to do something different. So I had a kind of mad moment, really, and I decided to set up an executive search firm, really to try and find the people for the industry, actually never having even looked at an executive search mandate before, so it was kind of a bit wild. But anyway, a good 10 years doing that too. Learned a lot, had a brilliant career doing that. And then I was invited by WPP, who was a client of mine, to join them corporately. And so that's what I did. And one of the great things that I've enjoyed is setting up Stella, which is our leader network, and it actually now embraces anyone that is interested in women's careers, because I think it's really important to bring men as allies with us.
Yes.
And, you know, that is something that I spend a lot of time on now too.
Yeah. And Poppy, okay, again, we were talking before about your tenacious start in rugby. Can you explain that story, please?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough that I started really young when I was playing rugby, so 6 years old. Due to my younger brother and my dad, just went down to an after-school club and started playing. And, you know, since then I've never stopped playing, so it's a very long time. But and
you started your own team at 6 years old?
No, not six, but yeah. When I went to secondary school, they didn't have rugby. It just wasn't a thing for females at school. And me and my sister, I've got an identical twin, we made them have a rugby team. So by the time I left secondary school, we had a rugby team. But yeah, and since then, you know, they've asked me, what do you want to do when you're older? And it just wasn't possible to say, oh, I want to be a female athlete, I want to be a rugby player, because there just wasn't contracts for females in rugby. So it wasn't until I had many careers in the prison service. I was in the prison service for a couple of years, and then I worked in a fancy dress shop. I worked in the co-op. I served travel money in Sainsbury's, like everything, just so I could play rugby and still live. And then when I was about 24, I got a professional contract, and I was the first of 32 people in the whole of England to get a contract.
Wow.
So yeah, and that's
incredible. And Louise, I'm just interested that so you had a career as a police officer, and obviously that was cut short. So were you interested in boxing before? I mean, did you box when you were a police? You had no interest in it before?
I'd watched boxing, and I loved to sit down on a Saturday night and watch the big fights like most of us do. And I'd always wanted to take myself to a class, but I just had never had the chance. It was kind of that, there was always something more important or something that, you know, happening. I kind of fell into it by accident. So as I've retired from the police, I was feeling sorry for myself for a good year and decided I needed to make a change either that day or sometime soon. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life feeling the way I felt. And it was the first time in life that I'd not felt like I had purpose, and I didn't feel strong, I didn't feel confident, all the things that I was as a police officer. Yeah. And so I found myself a personal trainer. We were in the gym, just doing basic physio and sort of rehab work at that point. And there was a punch bag in the corner of the room. And I just...
Take your frustrations out on it.
Almost. It was a case of, I just went, oh, I would have loved to have done that as an able-bodied person, and discounted it. And he turned around to me and said, why don't you do it in your chair? And they were the best words that he could have ever uttered to me, because those words changed my life.
Wow, that's amazing. And Vic, I'm interested in your photography, in that you're a portrait photographer, but what made you specifically choose portrait photography? And, you know, and obviously you know, your passion is photographing women and photographing strong women and sort of highlighting that. But what specifically was it about portrait photography?
Thank you. I think portrait photography is fascinating. You meet people you meet some really special people, all of us are special, but sometimes you just connect with those people on a different level. And photography, it's like a tool. And I think it's fascinating when you meet strangers and you create together and you make a statement. You can make a statement together. And especially being actually a female photographer and photographing females, I think what I can bring a different perspective from women's side as well. Because usually in photography, we grew up with seeing all the ads of like sexy women on, you know, like on the posters. But the funny thing was, all those adverts, we were supposed to sell products to women, but we were created by men.
Yeah.
It was like, how, why? So I'm glad that I am part of this now, that I can actually slightly shape the way we see women.
Yeah, fantastic. And Rosemary. So, so you've obviously had 2 careers, maybe more, I don't know, but you started off in the clubs in London. And so how did you sort of get into that? Was it just a passion for clubs, or did you...
I think I was always a portfolio worker without realising that I was a portfolio worker. And yes, it would be natural gravitation growing up in London. The fusion of music and people's ethnicities, sexualities, and then really the clubs came out of necessity, the safe harbours for people. And at the time, we didn't really realise, I don't think, what we were doing. We were just doing it, just so that we could be safe and we could, you know, experiment and be as we are. And not sure everyone here knows, but the Blitz Club, the house band was Spandau Ballet.
Yeah.
Boy George was on the Cloakroom. So yeah, it was we were just doing it, DIY.
Yeah. Okay. So I would quite like to know what the kind of early stages of inspiration and motivation were. I mean, what do you think it was? I mean, did anyone have any parents who were? I mean, I know you probably all had supportive parents. Maybe you didn't, but was there a particular person in your life? I mean, not necessarily a parent, but a mentor who kind of just said to you, "You can do anything you want." And how important was that to you?
For me personally, when I was growing up, I always wanted to be in sport and in it. And obviously my dad helped me out by taking me when I was very, very young, which was like unheard of back then to play rugby. But it's actually quite sad that when I was younger, all I looked at was the Johnny Wilkinsons, the Martin Johnsons, you know, all these sort of people, the Ben Kays, and I'd looked up to these blokes. And it wasn't until sort of older in my life now, I look back and I go, how sad was it that I didn't have a female to look up to and go, hang on a minute, she plays sport, she's absolute role model, you know, everything she stands for, I want to be like that. And, you know, now that I just want to make sure that I give that back to somebody else. So, you know, when I was younger, I had a female rugby player that came in a little bit older. And when I was a little bit older, and I used to have that picture on my wall forever. And now when I go back to local rugby clubs, I go, I want to make sure that someone has that, like my picture on the wall, and they're looking up to that. Yeah. Because when I look back, I didn't realise how sad it was that we just didn't have female role models.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's important, but because you know, the whole kind of male-dominated sports field, especially. I mean, how did you have the nerve? I mean, how did you break into it in terms of? I mean, were you told that you couldn't do it? Were you told that you shouldn't do it?
Me?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
yeah,
you, but
yeah. Women didn't do it. Women didn't. You know, women didn't ride. Not in races. You know, and believe it or not, there wasn't many women as stable girls at the time when I went into it. But I never forget. I know probably not a big fan, but a lot of people. But Margaret Thatcher, I had the pleasure of having dinner with her one night, with quite a few people, and I got chatting to her, and I said, I told her I was just going into a horse race. I was a jockey, and I was, you know, it was quite tough. She said, "Be strong, be determined." That's the 2 words she gave to me. That she said, "Be strong and be determined, and you'll succeed." And I never forget that. And you talk about someone that was inspiring. She was inspiring for me, and she got me on the property ladder as well. Back in the 80s. Well, she did, and she helped us, didn't she? So, yeah, I never forget her telling me that, and I love the woman, you know. She was great, you know. She gave me a bit of time. I was no one, you know, nobody, but she gave me the time. And being a strong woman at the time, in the 80s she was, I mean, you know, and, yeah, I had to be tough because it was a male-dominated sport that I was in. And I had a lot of kickbacks, you know, and I had harassment, sexual harassment, and... You know, I got brought down in races because they didn't want a woman around. Even the stewards were against women riding. You know, it was horrendous. But, you know, you don't have mental health issues in those days. You just got on it, and got on with it, you know.
I mean, with, you know, all your successes, I mean, I would come with failures as well. I mean, have you ever faced, I don't know, what's been the biggest obstacles you faced in your careers?
Men. Saying you can't do it, but we can. I'm just a true gentleman, Jack.
I I would say that the doorman, having to work with the doorman, particularly Camden Palace when I went there, because it'd be the mean machine, so Lenny McLean's doorman was still there. So, but we managed to work collaboratively in the end. But on reflection, I was thinking, just to go back a little bit to what Gay had said there, about, take the politics out of things, whether you're a royalist or you're not a royalist, or whatever your politics are. But for me, I think, I'm not sure I did a lot of thinking, I just got on with it. But however, there were 3 women at the time. There was the Queen, there was Margaret Thatcher, and there was Vivienne Westwood. So these were like, and Vivienne was a queen to me. So it was like, these were really inspirational. I guess they sort of bolstered me to like, they're doing it, so why can't I?
Yeah. I mean, Vic, so if growing up, did you have, were you always interested in photography or art, or was there somebody that inspired you, or somebody that introduced you? Was a teacher, a mentor?
Well, photography came to my life about 12, 13 years ago, and in my 26, 25, when I was 25, 26, but I never thought photography would become profession, would become my lifestyle, and it was introduced to me completely by accident because of my husband Marius, and but also I always wanted to be in arts, but I didn't know how to draw, how to paint, and photography seemed the best way I could actually express myself, and I guess that's why it's photography. But definitely when I was growing up, arts from Lithuania, and arts in Lithuania, perhaps in some countries still, it's kind of for not for poor people, but obviously society push you to do something like become a lawyer, become a doctor, become someone else, but don't go to the arts kind of side. So I think it's people should do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I think one thing that I would say as a hurdle is being a mother, and I had a really brilliant mother who was had a career, and I think that was really helpful for me, that I could see that it was possible to work and have a family life. It was much tougher for her than it was even for me and subsequently. But one thing I do say to people a lot is I have 3 sons, and I really say to people, really try and stay with it. There will be times when it's really tough, but try and stay with your career. And I say, don't always try and climb the ladder. Sometimes climb the career tree and maybe sit on a branch for a little while, take in the view, and just see whether or not you can rest for a while there. Not rest idly, but don't always try and go up, because there will be times when there are demands on your life that are difficult to manage. So I think you have to be realistic. I think managing lots of different things in your life can be a challenge, but I think if you're passionate about what you do and you have good support, so I think it's really important that, again, men see their role as equal in family life. We also need to address childcare in this country. It's ruinously expensive for people, and it prevents people from having the careers that they deserve. So I think there are some kind of fundamental things that get in the way too of having a great career. But I think, believing in yourself and sticking with it is key.
And do you think that, do you feel more of a responsibility when you're in charge, say, do you feel more of a responsibility to elevate women and to make life easier for women in the workplace? Does that, I don't mean to say it's a burden, but do you feel a huge sense of responsibility to help that happen?
I think it's a privilege, actually, to do that. And, being able to impart wisdom, knowledge, it's definitely a privilege, definitely not a burden.
Yeah, because there's this kind of misconception, I think is a huge misconception, of women sort of getting to the top and kicking the ladder out from underneath them, and which is nonsense. But I had this theory that probably sometimes years ago there was only one space at the table, and people just had to kind of grab that, and it wasn't as inclusive. Do you think it's got better in business? Do you feel that it is heading in the right direction, or is there still a lot of sexism and women being held back in the workplace?
Do you mean to welcome other women in, or
Yeah, and to
yeah,
elevate other women
I
into
think that
positions of power.
I think a lot of people would like the narrative that someone is Queen Bee, and actually, you know, I mean, for me, that couldn't be further from the truth. I feel much more empowered, much more successful, much stronger with women around me, and I think, you know, it's my job personally to pave the way for people in my team to see that, you know, I'm a mother of 2 children. I have a very chaotic life. I travel a lot. I work a lot. But actually, that it is doable. I said this to you earlier. It does take a village. And I'm reliant on a lot of people. And I don't say that you can have it all. I think you can make it work, but it's hard. But actually, to be really open and have an open discussion and be honest about, like, you know, haven't got it all worked out. I am struggling. Although I might look one way from the outside, I do find it tough. I do struggle with leaving my kids, you know, to come to something like this. But also, you know, I'm entitled to that. And we talked about, like, the mum guilt and the stuff like that. And I said to my husband, do you feel guilty? And he said, no, never. You know, and actually it's a lot of, you know, this narrative that we impose upon ourselves, that society imposes upon us. And actually, the more that we can support and lift one another up, and, you know, and it's okay to leave early. And, you know, I get in and regularly work once I put my kids to bed. And sometimes I don't. But actually, you know, to have that conversation and not feel bad about that, or not feel bad for missing certain things at work because you have a role as a mother, is really, really important for us to have those discussions and support one another and lift one another up and praise one another and know that you're going to have really shit days and there's someone there to, like, have that conversation with. I think it's wildly important, and the more we all do it, like, I think the better it is for everybody.
And it's important to be a role model, isn't it? I mean, if your children or whoever in your life is looking up to you and seeing you living your best life and, you know, doing what you love to do, then surely that's the best example.
Yeah, 100%.
Could you just talk a little bit about Stella and what you know, what Stella promotes?
So WPP is a company of over 100,000 people, with lots of different agency brands, some of which you will have heard of, I'm sure. And so Stella was set up in the UK 8 years ago to really create a sense of community, to your point, inspiration and support for women leaders, principally, actually, many of whom were sort of a little on their own. And it's grown from that to a global organisation within our business. And now we invite really anyone that, as I say, who's interested in women's careers to be part of it. So we have events, we have training, very particular training, actually, in areas that we think are really important to women. And we have fun things, and really what we're doing is just really create that sense of intimacy and community and support.
And in terms of, you know, promoting brands and everything, I mean, do you think that that advertisers and people are missing a trick when it comes to women? I mean, do you think they're ignoring women at their peril to a certain extent? I mean, I know you guys are trying to change all that sort of thing, but I mean, do you think that still goes? I mean, it would be great to see brands sort of supporting more women in different walks of life. And do you think, you know, there is a trick being missed in that respect?
I want to mention something that we're doing, which is as part of United Nations Women's, UN Women, which is a campaign really to address stereotypes of women in advertising, because it's such an influential sphere. So I think that's something where our industry can actually move the dial quite successfully. So to not position women in traditional roles, but to make sure that people see men and women doing, you know, things equally or differently. And I think that's quite an interesting way to tackle that problem. Mm.
I'd just like to answer that one, just because
yes.
I feel so strongly about it. So a lot of you will know the sports director of old. We are changing dramatically. And one of the big key things is about leading with her, but supported by him. To your point, it's really, really important. And what baffles me still to this day is that brands, they will remain nameless. I should really name and shame, but
yes, you should. Name and
but
shame.
I'll probably lose my job. So no, I do name and shame them on a daily basis. But ultimately, you know, they're very much around, you know, oh, we've got to think about her as our consumer, and we've got to think about this, and then actually have no idea about what we as women want and need. You know, they might not have the product to support what they're trying to say. They won't have the spokespeople, they won't have the sponsorship, they won't have, you know, the right people that they would absolutely have when you look at men in sport. And it, you know, it annoys me profusely, which I like to be annoyed because it means I poke the wasp's nest and it means I do something about it. But ultimately, you know, when you look at a male athlete, these conversations don't even come into play. To the point, you know, women might not have the right kit to wear. And they're professional athletes, you know, they're going to the Olympics, they play professional football, professional rugby, professional tennis. Tennis is actually a bit better, but it's our job as a brand and as those big sports brands and fashion brands actually to position women at the forefront. And that is not about, you know, I use this term man down, and that doesn't mean woman up, that doesn't mean pink it and shrink it, because as we all know, that's hugely insulting to us who have brains, which we all do. So it's very much around, like, how do we give an equal share of voice in a way that is meaningful? And, you know, and it's things that we all need to do, particularly in the advertising world, from brands, in marketing, and really position women in a light that is realistic and is fun and engaging and actually truthful. So, yeah, I feel really strongly about that.
I'm sorry, can I just add something as well to what you were saying? I thought, well, again, like it comes to advertising and photography, for example, how, you know, like you just said that more and more brands are showing more diversity, like more women, but still, like, for me, I still don't understand, like, sometimes it's nothing wrong that men photographs with women, but sometimes, like, how can you talk about empowerment and see those final images but still being portrayed by a man? So for me, it's like, you know, like, where is the kind of truth? Like, why couldn't be created by women as well? And how other women would see differently.
Yeah. And have you come across that, Poppy, in terms of sponsorship? And
yeah, so for me, visibility is huge, and they had a big campaign in women's rugby. You can't see it and you can't be it. So, yeah, it's massive. And I think Victoria's point there is about how in women's rugby, there's not many women's coaches, it's all men's coaches. And, you know, we need to make sure that women are getting coached by females. And there's the reason we're not getting coached by females is because they haven't had that chance to get better at coaching. They haven't had that accessibility to be coaches. It's always the men get the jobs, the men, you know, there's just no opportunities for female coaches. So we definitely need to make sure that's better. And I want to see the, you know, the next Premiership winners being coached by females. And, you know, the next England team, not the men's England team or the female England team, we want to get a women's coach up there. So I think that's probably a big step that women's rugby's got to take next to make sure that there's a female coach very soon.
And how can that happen? I mean, what would you suggest? I mean, what can brands do? What can large companies do to support you with that, or to support women in sport in that way?
Yes, we just got our first title sponsor ever for the Women's Six Nations. So we've never had a brand associated with us, and we've always constantly been on our own. And this year we had TikTok. So
yeah, I noticed that. That's great.
Yeah,
good old TikTok.
The amount of dances they tried to make us do and things like that. Yeah. It had its pros and its cons, but yeah, it was good to finally have a big brand with 1 billion people on their app watching and getting our names out there and our all the games and the clips of us out there and just growing the sport. And women's rugby is the fastest growing sport in the UK, so we want it to get bigger and we want it to get better. And I just think with then that there comes more opportunities, and it just, you know, it opens up loads of avenues.
Yeah, on the same scale as women's football has opened up to a certain extent. We just need to see, we need to see it in rugby as well.
We do.
Yeah. Louise, I want to talk to you about Chronic Warrior UK. So it's one thing to go through what you've gone through and then to take up boxing as part of your own journey and kind of mental health and, you know, getting yourself back to feeling strong. But, I mean, I just find you incredibly inspiring, because what prompted you to then want to spread the word with this? And can you just talk to me a little bit about Chronic Warrior UK and let us know what you do with that?
Yeah, so Chronic Warrior UK is run by women.
Excellent.
We are also 90% women, which is unheard of in the boxing side of things. But we're a bit more than just adaptive boxing. I'm an aromatherapist, and aromatherapy was a huge tool for mental health management for me, going through those dark times that I touched on earlier. And Chronic Warrior came from people who have a chronic condition, chronic illness, chronic pain, something that's persistent. You battle it, you fight it every single day. You're a warrior. And that's where Chronic Warrior came from. So it was all about releasing your inner warrior through aromatherapy, through holistic means. And for me personally, it was about reducing medication and trying to take a bit of control from that side of things. So I qualified myself as a aromatherapist, and I started creating these blends to help different people with different conditions. And from that, I started the conversation with the boxing. And it became this natural progression into, actually, they may seem like worlds apart, but boxing and aromatherapy are incredibly holistic, incredibly mindful, and you don't have to get punched in the face to enjoy the benefits of boxing, albeit some of us enjoy that part as well, but yeah. And so it was kind of starting to bring the two things together, really. And lockdown helped with that in a weird and wonderful way. We try and find the light. We talked about it earlier, trying to find the light in the darkness. And in that time, we were all sat at home. We were all feeling very isolated. But as a disabled person, outside of lockdown, I was also quite aware of how difficult it was to find fitness to be accessible, boxing to be accessible, all of these things. So literally 7 days after the first day of lockdown, I said, right, let's put some online classes on for me and my 3 boxing friends. And that's what we did on Facebook. There was 4 of us. And then it starts to get a little bit of traction, and then you get a couple of messages and a little bit of an inquiry. So I was like, oh, we'll set up a little group chat. Let's keep it going. We're only going to be in lockdown for 10 weeks. 2.5 years later, we are still doing those online classes, and that's the beating heart of what Chronic Warrior UK became. So we knew we were going to come out of lockdown, so we started to look for homes, for gym hubs that we could deliver a safe, non-contact version of adaptive boxing.
And did you get funding for that, or did you have to? Do you have funding? Do you need some funding? Any guys on the panel could help you with funding?
So much. You won't maybe know, but adaptive boxing in itself isn't actually a recognised competitive sport. It hasn't been regulated yet. So when I hit that punch bag that first time and I started looking for somewhere to do this, there was nothing, there was nobody. So that was my first challenge. So finding these hubs, finding these inclusive places, and then working with the national governing bodies to create that pathway into competitive boxing. Hopefully by that point the funding will come in to support more clubs becoming accessible. So we had our first small amount of National Lottery funding beginning of this year, which has supported us in delivering some adaptive boxing classes for young people from the age of 4 to 13, which have been completely free. And we try to make it accessible, so it's financially accessible as well as physically accessible. Because again, with disabled people, you're more likely to be on the poverty line than if you're an able-bodied person. So yeah, it was lockdown, it was the community that naturally grew.
And so what's the goal? Would you like to see it in the Olympics?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's my job. That's my job to get it there. So like I said, I work with England Boxing. It's took me a big journey to get to that point to be able to work with them. But fingers crossed, let's hope we can see some version of it at 2028.
Okay, you should all talk after.
That's the plan.
That's incredible. Really, really inspiring. And Vic, can you just talk to me a little bit? We were just chatting before the panel, but can you just chat to me a little bit about the female lead in that project and how that came about?
So the Female Lead, it's a females organization empowering women, and we are one of the biggest in the world right now. And we created a book with 67 the most incredible, inspiring women, and all of them be sharing their own stories, and people can just get extremely, like, a lot of inspiration from them, and those type of projects, they are important because you can always find a role model. It's very hard to find, like, the right role model. There are plenty of us out there, but not for everyone. And the more we do such projects, the more people can actually see that if she can be, I can be too. And I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, that if you can't see it, you can't be it. Yeah, it's incredibly important. And do you find that, but your career has been stifled slightly because of that? That's your focus. I mean, I know you find it inspiring, but you know, again, photography is a very male-dominated profession, and also I think there's some statistic that says that women are paid 40% less than men in that profession, which I'm sure is rings bells with everyone, but specifically in that profession, that really kind of
an interesting fact is that there are about 70-80% of female studying photography, but only like 14% becoming professional photographers. And yes, you are right, it's 50% underpaid. And but I think for myself, like, I think in general, it's very, like, obviously when I started, everyone said to me, like, oh, it's going to be so hard, and it's not like it's easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but people always say that people want to see, not like want to see, but people always try to put you kind of like realistic, if I can say that, like, are you sure you want to do that way? Like, are you sure you want to go that way? But actually, I'm a huge believer that you are the person who can make your own opportunities. If there are no opportunities, you create them. And this is what, like, for me, English obviously is not my first language. And for me, it was such a huge barrier to start photography and to start my own business. But for all the journey, I made my own opportunities. I would go, I would knock the door, I would just ask until it would be open. Not always it's open, but you do that.
Yeah. Amazing tenacity. Yeah, wonderful. I just want to talk about career change for a second, specifically Rosemary, because you obviously, you had this huge successful career, and then what made you, I mean, I've been to some of those clubs, and I'm sure that, acting as a psychologist is not a huge leap from hanging around with all those types to being a... So what prompted you to make that career change, and why did you choose that?
I think it was natural gravitation. When I first started, I didn't really see the link. And then, because I had like my inner critic, I was the girl that used to hop off school so they could go and do something else, so I hadn't studied. I wasn't a natural academic. So the inner critic was sort of winning, sort of saying, oh, that's miles away from what you've done. And then, of course, and I met good people along the way, supervisors that would encourage me and open me up to seeing that it was natural, because this was my life experience. And it was well, invaluable, absolutely invaluable. Because you can learn as much theory from books, and the theory really does inform, and it is really useful. Certainly it is needed, but if you haven't got the life experience, you can have as much theory as you like, but you're not going to really be able to be with your client and, offer the things that you say, confidentiality, non-judgmental, safe. I've been offering safer environments all through my working life with those clubs.
And in terms of your female clients, I just wanted to know whether you feel that the people that you treat, is there an impact to do with sexism, say in the workplace, or anxiety, or, I mean, is it more prevalent in women? Because of that, because of their mental health?
Yeah, I'm always a little bit careful.
Yeah,
around,
I mean, I don't want you to name names.
No,
obviously.
no, and I appreciated that you didn't, but it's just I guess because it's, you know, I'm very sort of strict with my confidentiality. I do, when I go to my therapist, it's like it's key for me. But yes, there are threads that come through, and yeah.
And what is your? I mean, what's the goal? What drives you to do the work that you do?
I was thinking, sorry, Julie, just because you'd asked me that question there. So the work that I would do, because as a therapist, as you probably all know, you're not allowed to tell your client. You know, that's not my position to do. Yeah. But I encourage them. You know, we do a lot of work around boundaries, all these things that they wouldn't have had because they could have been eroded from in the family unit as they were growing up, and certainly in schools and their life journey. You know, and all my clients are all different ages. They come from, you know, young teens to in their 70s. It's you know, late 70s. I sort of lost my thread, but yeah, I encourage them. You know, that's what I could do. Is sit with them, sit there with, you know, because a lot of things that it could become, they could bring in childhood sexual abuse, because I work with a charity 1 in 4, and that's the mainstay of the client base there. But you know, just to stay with it, offer them that safe space, and to work with their boundaries and work on their self-esteem and using their voice. You know,
and. When you decided to go down that path, did anyone? I mean, did you have critics? Did people try and dissuade you from it, or did they think you were mad? Did they think you were, you know, a career change?
No, I think ageism with certain people might have come in. I think the people that knew me, and particularly ones that I'd worked with over the years when I was on the Dora nightclubs and doing the promotions, etc., they really thought that it was a natural place for me. They were like so supportive. But definitely there were some people, it's like, well, you're starting at that age, you know. It's because my entry to it was really the menopause. Yes, and that's when I started having therapy. And I wish I'd had therapy when I was younger, but I didn't, you know. No going back, only going forward. And that was my entry point into it. But, you know, fairly early menopause, 42, perimenopause. But there was still that ageism even at that age, you know. Now I'm 66. It's like, but then 40, you know, a comparatively young woman. But it's like, oh, you'll be retiring soon. What do you want to do that for? Yeah, a lot of what do you want to do that for? Yeah.
And have you come across that ageism within? I mean, because when you had a hugely successful career, you said that you had weight issues, and that's what made you give it up, which must have been heartbreaking. But did you? But obviously it's just in your blood and your passion, horses, and you became you went on to be a hugely successful trainer. So how was that transition for you?
It was tough, but because when you're at the highest level in sport, you can. I know a lot of people, whether it be male or female, suffer from depression. You've been at this high level, and then suddenly it's nothing. You're not on a pedestal. You're not on the TV. You're not out there and getting praise. So it's quite tough within sport, to deal with that. And I found that, you know, really with transition to being a racehorse trainer, it gives you that same sort of drug, the feeling of winning and the determination to keep going on. But kind of getting off the subject a little bit, because of the place I was put in, being so high up in horse racing, I've managed to do some actually worthwhile good with myself and actually go to Ukraine and save horses. We saved over 500 horses and people. I've done 2 trips. I've done 2 trips over there, and it's quite heartwarming. You know, it really upset me a couple of times. Saving people that have lost their lives completely, and they've got their animals, their horses. One girl had mental health issues, and she had this horse. She had to get it across, very important, and it was really important. And thanks to my job, my horse racing job, that I've managed to put it out there. I've actually created a charity, and we're getting money through to help and save animals, horses, dogs and cats, and people, of course, on the Ukraine border.
Amazing. So I just want to read something to you and see if it rings a bell. Emotionless, hyper-professional, bitch, unfeminine. Well, you know, the list can go on and on and on. I mean, what was that?
Gay.
Oh, okay, well. So, I mean, is that I mean, we hear about, you know, all these experiences and these stereotypes, but I mean, have you directly experienced that sort of?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because these.
Oh yes.
You know, this kind of strong. I mean, men are called strong and strident.
Men haters.
You know, and confident, and these attributes are kind of, you know, big men up, and they're used to kind of bring women down. Have you all experienced that? Yeah. Can someone just talk a little bit about that? About your experience with that?
I think in policing it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Because often a strong female officer will be seen as a trouble causer. And actually, and I talk from lived experience with this, one of the first things I got taught in policing was accept nothing, believe little, challenge everything. And I held on to that. So when a male superior might be coming to me and giving me what he believed to be a lawful order, accept nothing, believe little, and challenge everything. So I was ultimately the trouble causer because
excellent.
Yeah, I actually had a brain and I could think for myself, and I think that was an issue within policing. Those few strong women within superior roles were feisty. They were, oh God, you don't want to speak to her. Wait till such and such is on shift. You'll get the day off if you ask them. And it's that kind of stereotype. But equally, as a PC female, I would get sent out to certain jobs, incidents that would be more suitable to a female officer, despite the fact we'd all been trained to do exactly the same job. Yeah. So yeah, that's quite interesting from that side of things.
And what about an industry? Well, I mean, I know it's rife, probably, but
I know. I think it's. I just think it's a really tricky thing to navigate in that you're expected to be one way, and if you're that way, then you're like a ball breaker. But if you're, you know, if you're too soft, then you're a pushover. And I just think it's a really tricky thing for women to try and be themselves, you know. And I think with age and experience, I've definitely learnt to be more myself and be non-negotiable and not take no for an answer and speak up. I think that's a really big thing. I always used to sit in meetings and sit there and think, does no one else think this is stupid? I like, why is no one like, and I really did think, why is no one else saying that? And I wouldn't say anything because I'd think people would laugh at me. And but now I do say what I think may be stupid, but actually because I've got the confidence to say it, but normally everyone else is thinking it. And so I would urge people to just speak up and ask the questions they think might be silly. But, you know, I've been called, you know, a ball breaker or, you know, or I've been called a bitch on email once before, which was brilliant because they copied me in and that was brilliant. I loved it. But, you know, but I genuinely, I mean, I wasn't being a bitch. I was just being straight. And I was asking a question that, you know, if someone else had answered, they probably wouldn't have got that response. So I do think it's that, you know, it's that, you know, I think as well, women we're sort of inherently trained to want to be liked. You know, and everyone wants to be liked, you know, but it's also liked with being powerful or successful is a tricky place. You know, I'd love to know who's worked that out because I certainly haven't. But I think, you know, you move forward, right? You just have to keep going and hope that, you know, yourself is enough and be comfortable with that. And if people don't know, everyone's going to like you, you know, and certainly don't like me that much. So, but it's, you know, you've got to just be authentic and try and, I guess, do what you think's right and not be afraid that people will try and take you down from time to time, probably more so than if you're a man. But that's okay.
For me, in women's rugby, language is really important. So quite a lot of the time, you know, in the media or any coverage we get, we'll be classed as being aggressive or like ill-tempered and stuff like this. And we've dropped a ball because we must be really, really nervous that we're playing in a big game. Yeah, emotional, exactly. But for men, it's like, oh, you know, it's raining, it's right, it's wet, or you know, they really fronted up really well then, and things like this. And just the language that get used for a female rugby player in female games is completely different to what they write about from the men's. And people forget the weight of their word and how when they're describing things, they just, for women, like with the girls play rugby, like we're not, we're the women, you know, we're the women's side, they call us the girls side and things like that. So I think that's just really important and sometimes can be really easily forgotten about.
And do you think that starts early on in sort of education, you know, in schools, trying to navigate that with girls and boys? I mean, would you, for instance, go into schools and talk about stuff like that? I mean, I'm asking you. Well, I'm telling you, you should. But, you know, because you're so inspiring, and I think it is important for young children to. That's where they learn that kind of language. They learn that really early on, don't they?
Yeah. So I actually set up, before the pandemic, a company called the Women's Rugby Agency.
Excellent.
And I alluded to before regarding the fact that I was really inspired by a female rugby player coming to my rugby club, and now our main aim is to go to rugby clubs and schools and visit loads of as many young people as we can, and boys and girls, and really inspire them and stuff. So yeah, I think that we have to just make sure that people are accountable, and we need to learn and stuff. Quite a lot of people, you challenge them on something and they get really defensive. Well, it's a learning tool for everyone, and it's how you can think about how your words might affect somebody else, and sometimes we just kind of skim over that and don't add enough worth to what that means to somebody.
Jill?
Well, I think something quite interesting is happening at the moment, which is, as we've encouraged women to have a voice, find their voice, express their voice, they are now being assaulted on social media. And, you know, can be a very dark place, particularly if your job is to express an opinion and have an opinion and share thoughts. So I think it's something that we need to look at, and I'm doing something with our Stellar ladies in terms of not just media training, but social media training, and how to sort of address that and deal with it, so that you can, you know, continue to have the voice that you have fought hard to get.
And also within the workplace, I mean, there's got to be. I mean, I know that lots of companies have HR, but do you think it's changed that women feel more confident in coming forward about harassment or sex discrimination, or or not being promoted, or not being paid, you know, equal pay? I mean, do you think it is getting better? Are there more mechanisms in place to support women and help women in that regard?
I definitely think there are more mechanisms, but I have to, you know, have a really big shout out to the younger generation, because they are incredible in, you know, in having that confidence to call it out. And I think all credit to them. I think my generation put up with a lot, sort of quite silently, resentfully. But, you know, I think I see that with younger generation, how brilliant they are at calling it out, and I really admire that. Yeah.
I mean, especially with equal pay as well. I mean, it must be very difficult, especially if your field and you work in photography. I mean, you don't have an HR department, you don't have anyone you can go to say, and also when you're self-employed, a lot of the time you have no idea what other people are being paid. I mean, as an actress, I often find out that my male counterpart has been paid much more than me for doing exactly the same job and having a smaller part. And that's to do with agents. A lot of the time it's to do with agents, and they say, oh, it's not up to me, it's up to the agent. But actually, across the board, it's up to producers, and it's up to people who are running the agency. Like, for instance, if you're working for a certain company. But how do you protect yourself in that regard? Do you just have to, you know, be ballsy and go in there and ask for it?
I guess you just have to be, like you said, brave and put any figures. And obviously, it's very hard to budget things in general. But thank God we have one incredible role model, which is Annie Leibovitz. And for me, she was always a role model. And you know, if she can be that icon, like I can be too. And that's, again, like it's coming back talking about the role models, but obviously it's not easy, you know, like when someone like, it's not easy to budget things, I guess, but, and it depends as well, like if you have an agent or not. And like, I guess coming back to the other question as well, I just wanted to add, for me, the most annoying thing is when I meet people, especially when you're talking to a man, and you introduce yourself and you see you're a photographer, we always somehow think that you are like family portrait photographer. And like, you know, like it's nothing wrong with taking photos of babies, like definitely. But why would that be like the first thing that comes to your mind? Like, come on.
I think as well, it's about being non-negotiable in your self-worth. I really think like you have to stand your ground, and yeah, I mean, I've been in some real showdowns in terms of like my value, but I always kind of challenge people with you know, if you had to pay to replace me, what would you pay? And who would you replace me with? And, you know, and I think if you can kind of ask yourself those questions, I think you'll end up somewhere pretty epic, and then probably double it. And then you're in about the right ballpark. Because that's what men do.
Well, yeah, because there is this old boys network, isn't there, that everyone sort of knows about and, you know, everyone talks about, but, you know, it's not. But, I mean, do you think that there's a way that we can, you know, not have an old girls network, but it's just how important is networking and you know, supporting women and getting together and doing stuff like this and just getting it out there? I mean, how important do you think that is?
I think it's invaluable, absolutely. I have a friend and she does the South London side of Athena networking for women, and when I first started up Agape Therapy, which is what my business is called, those women were so supportive, absolutely, like with referrals, and so I'm sure there's other ones out there, or maybe there just needs to be more, so maybe that's something that someone there might be their new business model.
Yeah.
But I think without networking, you couldn't even build your business, especially if you are self-employed, if you have your own business. Networking is like essential, like it's a must. And sometimes, like when I started business, I was so shy, and when I had to speak to people, like I would be so unfair to go and talk to them. But when I started going to like 10 events a week and meeting people and talking to them and connecting, and everything, you just kind of build on those connections.
So I play, obviously, team sports. I'm really, really lucky. I'm always surrounded by absolutely awesome females and role models. But I'll tell you a little story that we got given our England contracts one time, and they locked us in this room and shut the door and said, you ain't leaving until you sign them. Yeah, so let's just say you definitely need strength in numbers, and we left that room without signing our contracts and all completely together, and you know, without everyone else standing our ground and knowing our self-worth, we probably would have rolled over and signed those contracts. So, so it just shows the sort of importance of the females that you're surrounded by, and you know, I'm absolutely honoured that I've got some awesome ones around me.
I just wanted to ask, I mean, this is open to anyone, but I just wanted to ask if you have a kind of mantra or a go-to phrase or something, or a routine that kind of gets you inspired or gets you through the day.
I always say, this will change. Whatever it happens, whatever emotion you feel, I always think this will change, and I think it really helps.
Yeah. I always say to myself, how hard can it be? And the answer is often really hard. But it works.
Well, I had the privilege of meeting Billie Jean King once.
Wow.
And she said to me, she's great inspiration to most women. And she said, how's your job? I said, oh, so much pressure all the time. She said, pressure's a privilege. And they're all stuck in my mind.
Yeah. I don't really like to ask this question because whenever I'm asked this question, it irritates me to the point where but I'm usually asked it by a man, so forgive me. But that kind of, you know, work-life balance. I mean, men are never asked about this question because they just assume that you know, their jobs are everything. But I think it's really important. I mean, it's certainly important for me, and I do have children. A lot of women don't have children, but you still need a work-life balance. So how do you achieve that? What is it that you do to make sure that you can do your job and be a healthy, sane human being?
Sane. I don't know about that.
Doing little things like this for you guys. I've come here for me doing this today. And when I say that, I don't mean not for chronic. Normally I would have said, do you know what? I'm going to have to cancel a class to be able to come down to London and to do this, and I'm going to let everybody down because these classes are not going to be able to go ahead, blah, 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 blah. And I would have just said, no, I'm really sorry, I can't do it. But doing these things, I'm literally in awe and listening and being inspired by little pieces of mantra, little stories and things that I know that from this experience, I can go back to my chronic warriors when things start back up again on Wednesday and go, guess what? You know you had that problem? This is how we're going to sort it. You know when you feel like this is what we're going to do. And I think, yeah, that's the balance for me.
Anyone else?
I think I have quite an interesting relationship with my husband. I mean, we've been together 17 years, but also we work together, and people just ask us, how can you actually live together and work together, because we are 24/7 together. But I think it's, for me personally, and by the way, he's the biggest feminist, which helps.
Yeah.
And but I think it really helps, like in terms of the balance. I think if I was by myself, I don't know how I would do that, but to have that really huge support from the side, it's incredible, and sometimes we all need that little push from the side.
I think mine's about keeping the tank full. I said this to a friend of mine who's been, like, had a huge promotion, and she was just like, I just don't know how to do it. Like, I've got 2 small children, I'm really struggling. And I was like, you've got to find those times that is for you, because if the tank's not full, you're literally no good to anybody. So for me, I get up really early. I spend time like looking up, like working out and stuff like that. And I just, for me, it's not about vanity. It's about just literally having an hour to myself where no one's asking me anything or like demanding any time from me. And that is really what keeps me sane, and sort of just making sure that I bring it back to, you know, rest is the work as well. You know, it's been said before, but, you know, when you're going at 100 miles an hour, a lot of the time, actually stopping and sitting still and just being still is really like a hard thing for me to do. I don't know about you guys, but I find it really difficult to go, right, okay, I'm actually going to not do anything today. But by filling that tank up, I think that really, really does help me, for sure.
And not everybody has the luxury of being able to go to therapy, but there's lots of, there's downsides of the internet, but there's wonderful upsides as well, and there's lots of little, even 5-minute mindfulness on YouTube. You can just nick little bits through the day, especially if you're very busy, you've got children, you've got a high-powered job. It could be just having like a really nice herb tea that you like the smell of, and you make that tea, but really take the time to sort of ground yourself and be in the here and now and actually savour it.
Yeah, because mental health in the workplace is really important. I mean, do you see in the kind of workplaces that you're in, do you see that changing to a certain extent? I mean, are there provisions for that? I mean, do people recognise it more, especially for things like menopause, in supporting women going through menopause in the workplace, which is now, thankfully being highlighted to a certain extent? I mean, do you think, how important do you think that is in terms of, and do you get any pushback from that?
We have mental health first aiders now, which
oh, wow.
I really like. People are trained in the same way as you would have had a first aider on your floor or in your team. Now we have mental health first aiders, and we have, their email will have MHA on the end of it, and they are somebody that you can just see, you can relate to quickly, and you can go to, and I think that's a good first step.
And where did that come from? I mean, who came up with that fantastic concept?
Wonderful woman within our business who, really pioneered it and got it underway, and just people really volunteer the whole time to do it. So things like that. Menopause, our CEO recently did a panel like this. And it was incredible, and he said the reason why he wanted to do it was because he
wow.
Yeah.
Progress.
Yeah, real progress. And he said he wanted to, he knew he'd have to prepare, obviously, and he wanted to understand more, and he knew that it would be a good way for him to, learn more, and I thought that was incredible.
Yeah, because the important thing is that, everyone's going to go through it. I mean, if you have the privilege to live that long. And I think it's really important to support it in the workplace, because, I want the younger generation not to have that stigma and fear of it, and have all those mechanisms in place by the time they go through it in the workplace. But what is the one thing that you think that would, I'd like to go around to each of you, but what's the one thing you would change in order to support women going through what you went through, or something you can do to elevate them, what's the one thing you think is the most important thing?
So we've just started a campaign called Women Box Period. And something I've noticed in boxing is you go into boxing gyms or gyms, and 9 times out of 10, there's going to be one toilet and it's not for women. And there's very, very rarely any female feminine hygiene products, any provisions whatsoever in these gyms. And also, period poverty is a massive barrier to sport. And so what Chronic Warrior UK have done is put on an initiative to provide free feminine hygiene products for all 226 amateur boxing clubs within the North West and Yorkshire regions. And within that, we want the conversation to be had with the male coaches. So it's not going to be a case of go to the one female coach in that gym and say, can you help me? It's about having that conversation and making that safe space. And that term needs to be in all aspects of business, all work environments and learning environments, safe space.
I think like if you cannot see the change, be the change. And like, so one of the examples, like I think we talked with you like Juliet, like earlier about in 2005, one very, very famous photographer created 107 portraits of presidents and prime ministers around the world, and only 4 of them were female leaders, which is insane. Like, what message do we send? And so now I actually took that kind of mission. My mission is to create this historical project where I want to photograph every single prime minister and president from the past and present. There are only 87 in total, and change the face of the power. So this is my personal mission.
Okay. There were so many actually that flooded into my mind. One of them is I'd like to see these politicians or people in power stop giving lip service to equality. I mean, I just think equality of pay in particular, you know, that's always infuriated me. How can you, you know, be doing the self-same job as a female, and your counterpart is getting double? So I think that's one of the things that I would really like to see truly happen. Truly happen.
I think I would like to encourage women to fear failing less.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, for me. I think in horse racing it's changed a great deal since my day. A lot of diversity. Women have a voice. I think that's really important that women have a voice.
Yeah.
And that's certainly changed. I'd like to see more of that within our industry, which is happening. There's more stable girls working in racing. It's becoming more 50-50 with male and female. So I think horse racing has come a long way, especially since the 80s. So it's the voice. That's what we need.
Yeah.
Stand up.
Yeah. For me, in women's sport, it's about breaking the stereotype. You know, too many young girls are put off by the judgment and the stereotypes of that you're butch or you're manly, or, you know, if you aren't going to play women's rugby, or you must be a lesbian and things like this. You know, we've got to break the negativity about women in sport, and how, you know, to me it just, you know, enriched my life, the fact that I've had all these absolutely awesome experiences. I've travelled the world, I've met some awesome people, all just through sport and a passion of mine. So, you know, I want to make sure that there's no barriers to these young girls coming through, and that everyone else have the same opportunities and the chances to achieve through sport.
I think on that note, if anyone else has anything else they want to ask, I think we should just give our panelists a huge round of applause.